In advance of beginning our study on the Yazidis and other religious and ethnic minorities in Syria and Iraq, just a little bit of business in advance for Tuesday. We want to put out a notice of our emergency session. We just need notional support from around the room that we're okay to do that, and the
a news release or press release.
Yeah, a news release or press release, so that we can put that together, and that's something that can be then passed around. Do we have an agreement that that would be something we'd like to do?
Is this the chair? Is this the Wednesday date that we were?
Oh yeah.
No, it's our Tuesday meeting. Our Tuesday meeting.
Tuesday meeting. It'll be the Tuesday meeting of the committee.
Okay.
The emergency session. Yes. Everybody okay? MP Hardcastle?
I thought we were doing a Wednesday, though. Did I dream that?
Yeah.
We had discussed it, and then, yeah, what happened with the schedule?
It's not the Aleppo meeting that's on Wednesday. It's a meeting with...
There was a Tibet.
Oh, it's the Tibet is on the way. That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Good. So I think we have said agreement. Have the
no, yeah. Sorry. Here we go.
Oh, I got it too. Okay, so I'd like to introduce our two witnesses from Foreign Affairs. Emmanuel Lamoureux, Director, Gulf States Relations Division. Welcome. And Juliana Natal, Director, Inclusion and Religious Freedoms. Did I pronounce the name correctly?
You did.
Okay, good. So thank you very much for being with us here today at the very start of what I think, as we have seen this week in Parliament, is something that we're all very much seized with. And I think that this study is going to be an important, a very important light shined upon this region. So you are our first two witnesses, and I thank you for being here to join us in that role today. And with that, if you can take 10 to 12 minutes, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I will be making part of my intervention in French, the second part in English. It is indeed an extremely important and timely topic. Donc, on m'a demandé aujourd'hui de m'adresser à vous sur la question des droits de la personne des Yézidis, des chrétiens et d'autres minorités religieuses et ethniques en Syrie et en Irak. Votre sous-comité a récemment été chargé d'étudier la situation des Yézidis et qui a fait donc l'objet d'un débat en Chambre la semaine dernière à la Chambre des communes.
This is the English channel. This is the English channel. This is the English channel. To begin with, I would like to review some recent events in Iraq and Syria in order to provide context for the current human rights situation for religious minorities in the region. I will then describe what Canada and the international community are doing to address the situation. Iraq and Syria have long been home to many ethnic and religious groups. Shia and Sunni Arabs and Kurds lived alongside smaller communities that made up around 10% of Iraq's population. Many of these groups have lived in Iraq for over 1,000 years and even enjoyed a certain level of protection. In recent years, however, many of these minority groups have faced persecution and displacement. For many of them, the areas where they lived were subject to power struggles between emerging militias. Geographically, and we should point out that the Mosul region in the north of Iraq is one of the regions with the highest ethnic and religious diversity in the country. So that's where the military campaign is going on, and the area is still partially occupied by Daesh. After years of violence and displacement, more recent data suggest that these groups now make up less than 3% of Iraq's population. Just a word of caution here, there are few reliable data. And because it's been a long time since the last census. According to official estimates, the number of Christians has declined from around 500,000 in 2003 to 80,000 now. That figure even is seen as high by some religious leaders. In recent years, Canada has welcomed over 23,000 Iraqi refugees, and there is an ongoing operation to receive Syrian refugees. These minorities are represented. Iraq has yet to implement a model of government that successfully balances power between Baghdad, Iraq's 19 governorates, and other authorities. The country has over 31 major political parties, which still reflect a strong internal divides along certain sectarian and tribal lines. Tensions between these factions risk undermining Iraq's very fragile political unity. And this problem will only become more pressing once the military campaign to liberate Mosul is completed and when communities no longer need to cooperate as much. So the glue holding them together, which is basically Daesh right now, is going to melt away and the situation might get worse. Syria has an equally long history of ethnic and religious diversity, with approximately 70 to 75% of the population being Sunni, though another 13% is made up of non-Sunni Muslims, and there are significant Christian and Druze populations, as well as a small number of Yazidi. The current war continues to disrupt and alter Syria's rich demographic map. While many minority groups, as well as Sunni and Shia Arabs and Kurds, have long faced discrimination in one form or another, the situation has become worse under Daesh. A major factor affecting communities in Iraq and Syria is that there is no freedom of religion or belief in Daesh-held territories. And, of course, there are also persecution problems and other problems. We're well aware of those. Religious minorities are forced to pay a jizya tax or convert. All minorities, some communities, some members of Shiite and Sunni communities are considered to be apostate and therefore kuffar, and are vulnerable to violence perpetrated by Daesh, so no one is safe really. Crimes against Christians, Yazidis, and other minorities, including killings, sexual slavery, torture, forcible transfer, and forced conversion, proliferate. Daesh has transferred Yazidi children from their families. It's taken groups of hundreds of Assyrian Christians hostage for extended periods of time. Its fighters have forcibly married Sunni women living in the villages it controls. These groups, as I explained, were already very vulnerable before 2014 because they were minorities even then, but they're even more vulnerable now. The effects of Daesh's reign of terror will be felt for a long time, and no ethnic or religious group has been spared.
Of horror, no group has been spared. Je vais maintenant donner un bref aperçu des.
With this in mind, I'd like to give you a brief overview of what Canada and the international community are doing to improve the very difficult situation faced by groups, religious and ethnic minorities in the region. In the immediate term, survivors of these grave abuses are being provided with the assistance they need. In particular, women and children who have suffered sexual violence and slavery require urgent psychological, social, and medical assistance. Since 2014, Canada has supported experienced humanitarian partners in Iraq, including the UN Population Fund, UNFPA, as well as other non-government organizations to provide direct assistance to survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. With Canadian support, our partners have established centres in camps and host communities across Iraq where women and girls are able to access psychosocial support, specialized medical care, and legal and other services. Support to women and girls affected by violence will remain at the center of our humanitarian assistance to Iraq in the years to come.
Operations Program, Canada is also supporting the Commission for International Justice and Accountability, CIJA, and its efforts to prepare for the criminal persecution of breaches of international criminal and humanitarian law committed by Daesh. I think you've probably heard about this programming. We view it as very important. CIJA has developed legal case files focusing on Daesh criminality in Syria and Iraq, including sexual slavery. In Iraq, CIJA has strengthened the investigative capacity of the Kurdistan Regional Government's War Crimes Investigative and Prosecutorial Units. Some courts in the Kurdistan region of Iraq have also begun hearing cases relating to these crimes under Iraqi terrorism law. At the same time, we're also looking at ways we can provide capacity building support to elements of the Iraqi justice sector, because we know that some of the Daesh criminals will be judged by local courts. For the moment, the Iraqi foreign minister has indicated that Iraq requires assistance to build the necessary capacity to collect and preserve evidence, and especially technology related to criminal justice and forensics. So that is a request that we are exploring. The Canadian government has also acknowledged international findings that indicate Daesh continues to perpetrate genocide against Yazidis. I think that's something we're well aware of, given the recent debates. In June, the Minister of Foreign Affairs recognized the evidence to that effect, and that were, from a UN report prepared by the International Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic that recognized the crimes that were committed specifically against Yazidis and the fact that those amounted to genocide. So the minister has twice written to the President of the Security Council in New York in May and in June of this year to request that the Security Council take action on the matter of Daesh's crime. He requested that a mechanism be established to investigate reports of violations of international law by Daesh in Iraq and in Syria, to identify perpetrators of such violations, and to ensure accountability. In September in New York, the minister also participated in a dedicated event at UNGA on the subject of Daesh accountability. The event helped to raise awareness about the need for the international community to hold Daesh accountable for its crimes. Many other foreign ministers and senior UN officials also participated. As you know well, on Tuesday, the government also supported a motion in the House of Commons that recognizes Daesh genocide against Yazidis and acknowledges that many Yazidi women and girls are still being held captive as sexual slaves, and calls for implementing recommendations in the report I was mentioning, the UN report, and also commits to providing asylum to Yazidi women and girls within 120 days. So Canada is not isolated among governments in pursuing the need for further action. The UK, in particular, is pressing for further action within the UN framework. They have called for the creation of a UN special representative mandated by the Security Council to lead a campaign supporting national and international efforts and to empower survivors. So we'll continue to work closely with the UK and others in the coming months to activate a core group of actors and coordinate between governments and other relevant organizations. I also want to flag that Iraq's participation in these efforts is critical. That's why Canada supports the Iraqi government's efforts to improve governance in the country, strengthen institutions, and mend ethnic and religious divides. Daesh has targeted all ethnic and religious communities across Iraq and Syria: Yazidis, Christians, Turkmens, Sabiamandians, and other groups. It has subjected these groups to horrors, including the use, in some cases, of chemical weapons. The Yazidis in particular have suffered terrible and particular losses that require special attention. At the same time, the international community must continue to assist Iraqi and Syrian communities affected by Daesh to overcome their losses and rebuild viable economies and societies, which will require wider commitments to justice and reconciliation. Thank you. Now open for your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. That was a very good way for us to kick things off. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass the floor to MP Sweet with the first question.
Thank you very much, Chair, and Ms. Lamoureux, thank you very much for your testimony. I greatly appreciate it. I wanted to tie two of the things that you mentioned in your opening remarks together and ask you a question in that regard. You mentioned just in your closing that Iraq's participation is critical, and I certainly agree with you. And earlier in your remarks, you mentioned that there are already cases being heard through the Kurdistan Regional Government, not only heard but being prosecuted relating to these crimes. Is there any concern in that regard that they're starting the prosecution now without the international community being there? In a sense, I think that some of these crimes are obviously going to be concerning some people who have been instrumental in death, torture, incarceration, and enslavement of many, and I'm certain that there should be an international accountability in that regard for this magnitude of crime.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, there are various accountability mechanisms at our disposal to prosecute crimes committed by Daesh, and we're studying, along with other members of the international community, including Iraq, these various mechanisms at our disposal. Of course, one of such mechanisms is the ICC. There are other mechanisms, including hybrid international tribunals that would be set up specifically in the context of the situation in Iraq and Syria. And there are obviously local tribunals. I think there are pros and cons to each of those options. Certainly the ICC has a certain legitimacy and would indeed bring those cases to the forefront of the international agenda. One element that we want to consider when we consider the ICC is the fact that it only allows for the prosecution of smaller groups of high-level, I would say more visible individuals responsible for those crimes. So that's why we want to, analyze every option, including local tribunals. Local tribunals. It's important to the extent that the country itself has suffered a lot, and having Iraqi courts judge criminals in Iraq has a certain value as well. But the Iraqi judicial system requires a lot of support. These institutions are fairly new. As we know, Iraq has been through successive wars and has had, little opportunity to build its institutions. So that's also part of the programming that's being considered in terms of governance and supporting the judicial system.
Do we have international partners present at these current undertakings right now, these prosecutions that are happening? Is the Kurdistan Regional Government cooperating so that we have judicial professionals there from Canada, the UK, and other partners?
I'll have to get back to you on this. Certainly, I can say that from Canada, we didn't. I'm not aware of us being present at any of those those prosecutions, but one of the reasons is that we had a very limited presence in Iraq until recently, so we're ramping up our presence, and including with a Canadian who will be based in Erbil. So to what extent it will be possible through that new presence to monitor more closely those processes, I think that should help. Access to the courts, I'm not able to answer. So we can get back to you with a more fulsome response.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Chair, this is profoundly troubling, and I just think we need to keep a monitor on this, that these cases are extremely important, particularly if there's somebody of a high level that's been orchestrating these crimes. I wanted to ask you, obviously there's a number of departments that are involved, from DND to immigration and yourselves. Are there some efforts in global affairs to, now that we've seen this conflict, we've seen multiple victims from Turkmen to Yazidi to Christians and different communities of Christians as well as different communities of Muslims, Somalis. Is there an effort now for us to, how would I say, reevaluate how we deal with the delivery of aid as well as those we target for refugees, asylum seekers and refugee status in regards to those groups that may be victimized more than others? I know that hasn't been the case in the past, but I think there's a clear demonstration here that sometimes when evil combatants start to target people, they victimize others more than different other groups. Is there some effort in the department now to take that into consideration?
Okay, so I will not be able to speak to resettlement, obviously, because that falls under the purview of IRCC. With respect to our assistance, and on this question, actually, I will start, and maybe I will ask Juliana to complement my response if she wishes to. So our assistance, there are several elements of it. Humanitarian assistance. So is the first part. Humanitarian assistance is provided with a focus on the most vulnerable people. So without consideration of ethnic or religious background. But because it focuses on the most vulnerable, we know that several members of minority communities are receiving such support. I was giving the example of the psychosocial support that's provided to women and girls who've suffered Daesh's abuses. We know that several of these women are Yazidi women. But
my time is pressing, so just to steer your answer a bit, yeah, I'm clear on that, but in this case, many of the most vulnerable didn't make it to the camps because they would even be victimized in the camp. So that's why I was asking you, is there a reassessment about how we do things based on those kind of variables that people are victimized in different degrees depending on who the combatants are?
So humanitarian assistance is not only focused on people who are in displaced persons camps or in refugee camps. It's also in host communities where we know that some of those minorities have fled. So that's for humanitarian assistance. So the other element of our assistance is development assistance, and in that case, we're able to development and security and stability assistance, actually, which the work of my colleagues falls under, and in that case we're able to target a bit more specifically, and that's where, for example, the CIJA project I was talking about falls. So on that note,
I'm not sure that I would be able to. Thank you for the question, first of all. I'm not sure that I would be able to add additional information in terms of if work is being evaluated within global affairs much more than my colleague has. But what I can say is that from the perspective of the Office of Human Rights, Freedoms and Inclusion, and more specifically from the perspective of inclusion and religious freedom, the division has been in touch closely with faith communities here in Canada that are in touch with communities on the ground in Iraq and Syria, and we are in the process of gathering information of precisely what the question is referring to in terms of what are the violations and how grievous they are, and what can be done. So we're working with faith communities and speaking to faith communities to learn more about the challenges that are being faced.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the second question. MP Khalid.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming in to speak to us about this very important issue. When I was in law school, I had a very dear friend who was from Iran, and he was also of the Jewish faith. which is a very, very small minority in Iran. And he is a very dear friend, continues to be, and he would tell me stories of discrimination and persecution that he would face and his family faced in Iran prior to moving to the West. So I understand the plight is very dire, and I was a little bit troubled, Ms. Lamoureux, when you indicated that after having dealt with Daesh, the problems of discrimination would still not end. So I am wondering, what role can Canada play, not only with respect to a political solution to work towards a more humanitarian way of governance in that region, but also in ensuring that these incidents are lessened?
Thank you for the question. I would say it's a question that's at the center of our daily work. I mean, I think one thing we have to understand is that these problems did not start with Daesh. They were certainly made much worse under Daesh. But the persecution of minorities and have been ongoing, certainly in Iraq for years, including under the regime of Saddam Hussein. So I think we have to be also realistic in our expectations, which does not mean idle. So the 3-year strategy that has been adopted for the region, I think, is a positive step because it is multi-year. I think, recognizing the fact that defeating Daesh is not the end of this. It's the beginning. It's the beginning of another phase that will be just as complex and difficult as the one we're going through. That's the first step. I think we have tools at our disposal, such as our development programming, our stabilization and security programming. There's much we can do in the area of governance, helping Iraq. Canada has an interesting model to offer because we're a federal country. And when dealing with diversity, it's a model that is often viewed as interesting, especially when communities have a history of violence and discrimination. Sometimes decentralization helps a little bit. So certainly we have programming in that area that exists already through our development funding, and we're looking at possibly expanding on that programming in the context of the 3-year strategy I was mentioning.
Thank you. And I just want to follow up on something that my honorable colleague said with respect to accountability. Now, we have called on the UN Security Council to bring Daesh to justice. I'm also recently suggesting that the ICC should play a role. Now, can you explain why the UN Security Council has still not referred the situation in Syria to the ICC?
In order for the Security Council to refer the situation to the ICC, there has to be agreement within the Security Council. So that would be the first step in this case. Iraq and Syria are not parties to the Rome Statute. This said, they would have the possibility to refer themselves the situation in their countries to the ICC, but they have chosen not to do so yet.
Okay, well, can you briefly describe, I'm not sure if this is in your purview or not, but can you describe what other nations such as Russia and the US are doing towards seizing the discrimination against minorities in that region?
Russia?
And the US.
Okay, I think specifically on Russia, I would have to get back to you on this. I'm not aware of any specific efforts led by Russia on that specific issue. With respect to the U.S., they're definitely one of the countries working with. I was referring to Minister Dion's participation at the Anga side event on holding Daesh to account. The U.S. was present there. So they're part of the network of countries who are actively looking at these options. But one thing I want to say on accountability is that Iraq has to be a part of it. I'm not talking about Syria, obviously, because it's a completely different business. But the solution has to be Iraqi led. So we're working with all of these countries to hopefully come to a mechanism, an accountability mechanism that will work. And as I said, so far, what the focus has been from the Iraqi government, they've really asked for assistance to collect evidence. The risk is always that such evidence, if you don't collect it rapidly, there's none to be found by the time you have a tribunal in place to consider the crimes. So that's been the focus so far. But certainly there's a lot of work happening as well. Within the international community to have those discussions about accountability mechanisms.
Yes?
You have an extra 30 seconds.
Extra 30 seconds. Then I'll just make a comment that oftentimes I don't think it's a specific religion that is targeted or that is the oppressor. I always think that it's just the vulnerable groups that always suffer, like women and children. So I want to thank you for all of your efforts with this important file.
Thank you very much. And next we're going to go to MP Hardcastle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very concise about the plight that we're facing today. And I was very intrigued to hear you talk a little bit, and that's what I'd like to hear more about, is our support or the role that we're playing in advancing the Iraqi government's response specifically with their judicial system. And if you've seen areas, if we're identifying areas where that can be a more supportive role for Canada. And as well, I wanted to ask you, so I'll ask you a couple things and then you guys can just talk until my time's up. I think that's one of the best ways for the use of our time in this format. The other question I wanted to ask you, was with regards to rolling out humanitarian aid and effort while there's ongoing military campaign as well. What are some of the challenges with that?
Okay, thank you. So maybe I'll start with your last question, and then I'll move to the first one. So on the challenges involved in rolling out our humanitarian assistance, yes, you're correct. I mean, particularly in Syria, I think we're all seeing the problems with respect to access to the most vulnerable people and the people who need assistance. So it's definitely a challenge. This said, some of the assistance is also going to host communities and refugee camps outside of Syria. For Iraq, it's also challenging, although in a different way, because we don't have the same multiplicity of actors as we see in Syria. Efforts at the moment are very much focused on the Mosul campaign because of the number of IDPs expected in the context of that campaign. So the latest numbers I've seen is over 10,000 IDPs, but we expect many more. And so, our partners are working very hard to provide those vulnerable people with, basic services and, meet their basic needs. One of the challenges we're facing is also access in a way, because some of the civilians are being used as human shields by Daesh. So that, of course, complicates the matter. But nonetheless, some civilians have been able to escape, partners are doing their very best to meet their needs. So far, I think I have numbers for you. If you give me a moment, I can tell you exactly how much assistance has been provided. So I think in Iraq we've committed 150 million at the pledging conference that took place in Washington in July, and of that amount, 63 million have been disbursed so far. And in Syria, so far in 2016, it's 65.35 million for 2016. And the total amount of humanitarian assistance committed for the region is $840 million, and that's for Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. So that's over 3 years. That gives you an idea of proportions. In terms of our work with the Iraqi government to help with their governance, and I think you specified justice system, those are definitely areas that are being considered in the context of the 3-year programming, an amount of which have been set aside, specifically for development programming. I'm not aware of any specific programming focused on the judicial system, but I believe that's an area that's being considered actively. I can get back to you on this after speaking to my development colleagues. I don't have the answer right away, but it's being considered, that I know.
You've still got a little more time.
Who would get to go next? Yeah. Okay, well, then just one more question, I guess related. So any program that we would do for the judicial system would be under the CIJA, or do we have our own or separate initiatives that also impact how they roll out, like with their judicial system?
No, it would not necessarily be under the CIJA. The work that the CIJA is doing with our support is very specific. It's basically collection of evidence. They're trained lawyers or legal experts who are putting together files with the expectation that those will be used in future prosecutions. So nothing binds us to working exclusively with them on an eventual program that would focus on strengthening the judicial system of Iraq. There are other partners that could be considered.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll move right along in the second round of questions. 5 minutes, Mr. MP Miller.
Donc, merci à vous deux pour votre témoignage.
Thank you to you both for your testimony. You're beginning a study that looks as if it will be massive and could be even more massive, but it concerns the right to life. I'd like to focus on the right to freedom of religion and practice of religion, insofar as affected groups like the Yazidi are specifically targeted by Daesh's genocide, and how that rhetoric will play in the future. Will it exacerbate the situation? Or do you believe things will get worse simply because people are now united against Daesh and will then disunite? We'd like to focus more on the right to freedom of religion. Thank you for the question. I'll begin by saying that this is the 27th of October, and that is International Freedom of Religion Day. So it's a very symbolic day that has a great bearing on the conversation we're having today. Yes, we can expect repercussions and future dangers for religious communities.
Able to respond more succinctly. With this in mind, what the Office of Human Rights, Freedom and Inclusion is looking at is exploring opportunities to support partners who are on the ground and who are working on inclusive projects, which will bring together faith communities, bring together faith leaders and other members, youth, for example, to dialogue and to work together to be able to address some of the issues that faith communities will be facing on the ground. These are existential questions for faith communities in this particular region, and so Canada is looking to find opportunities to support programming and projects that will bring together in an inclusive dialogue these communities. Thank you.
Puis en deux mots, si je pouvais...
In a couple of words. I can't speak very loudly. I'd just like to add something to this. One of the reasons we were talking about this is that some reports do point out that some members, particularly of Sunni communities, either through conviction or simply because they were threatened, were in some cases complicit in some of the abuses of Daesh. We know that some Sunni were victims of Daesh abuses. So when I talked about exacerbation, the risk is to lump all members of a given community into a single box. The same goes for Shiites, the Shiite militia. Some did commit abuses, so we can't consider everybody who is of the same religion or in the same community. We can't put them all into the same basket.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, interpretation cannot be provided unless we can hear the speakers through the microphones.
Yeah. Just give everybody a couple of minutes to get back to their seat. Okay, we're back and back in action. MP Janice, back to you.
Thank you. I'm going to talk really fast because I have a lot to say. I want to just start on the specific issue of the jizya. This might seem like a technical point, but I think it's really important. So sometimes people say that ISIS charges jizya to certain religious minorities. I actually think it's really important that we not say that, because jizya has a specific historic theological meaning within Islam. The jizya implies that practice of religion is allowed for those religious minorities, and that protection is provided in exchange for a fixed taxation. That is not what Daesh does. Daesh uses the historic claim of jizya to undertake extortion against religious minorities, but that extortion is not like a fixed tax. It is ongoing extortion, does not include protection, does not include the practice of religion. So this is really just a way of getting resources as a prelude to subsequent extermination. So to me, it's important that we not unintentionally give Daesh a propaganda benefit. I'd be curious for your comments on that issue, if you have thoughts on it.
No, thanks. I think it's a useful clarification. I mean, one comment I will make on this is that these I don't want to call them taxes now, but this extortion has been a very important source of revenues for Daesh, especially recently, because the coalition has bombed several of the oil fields they were using to have access to resources. So they've been relying a lot on those taxes. So with the territorial loss that they're suffering now, their resources are very seriously curtailed.
Thank you. That's a great point. So they are using this to significant effect in terms of resources, but it's an interesting indication again of the efforts by Daesh to cloak itself in the legitimacy of historic Islamic traditions, when in fact they're very clearly violating a lot of those basic tenets. I wanted to ask you about the treatment of religious minorities by Iranian-backed militias and the extent to which Western forces are cooperating with Iranian-backed militias who are also involved in human rights abuses against minorities.
Thank you. So yes, there have been indeed reports of abuses by some of the militias that are active in Iraq. Which most of them operate under the umbrella of Popular Mobilization Forces, but they're also independent militias who operate separate from that group. Such reports came out, namely in the context of the liberation of Anbar province, which is predominantly Sunni. And of course, the international community, including Canada, has been monitoring very closely and condemned such violations and has expressed very strong views about not repeating the same mistakes in the context of the Mosul campaign. So I don't know if you've listened to recent statements by Prime Minister Abadi, but he's been very clear that the protection of civilians will be extremely important in the context of the Mosul campaign. Unfortunately, we're seeing lots of civilian casualties at the hands of Daesh, but if at least Iraqi security forces pay attention to this, I think that's certainly an important goal of us, and certainly one element that was raised when you're probably aware of that there was a recent conference on Mosul stabilization and governance in Paris 2 weeks ago. So that was an important element that was stressed by all of the participants, including the Iraqis. And your other question was regarding to what extent we collaborate or work with those militias. We or the coalition, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. The answer is quite simple. We don't. We collaborate with the Iraqi government.
Excellent. So I've got about 30 seconds left. I just want to ask, in this discussion about the definition of genocide, I know we had sort of back and forth in the House and questions about it. Does the department have its own objective definition of genocide, which you can then use to advise the minister based on, yes, this is genocide based on the facts and this isn't, or is it a political decision ultimately whether or not to call a thing genocide?
No, the Convention of Genocide has a definition that is clear, and which is the one that we use.
Thank you very much.
And we're going to move on to MP Tabbara.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you both for being here today. My first question is on, is Canada engaged in negotiations to prepare for a post-Daesh? For example, if we look at a neighboring country to the west, Lebanon has a governmental system where the president is a Maronite Christian, the prime minister is a Sunni Muslim, and then the speaker is a Shia Muslim. So what I'm trying to get at is that if we see a post-Daesh, is Canada helping to work to stabilize a region with a stable government, with a government that's for Lebanon, it's a government that's stable right now, but it's very fragile. So my question is, after post-Daesh, is Canada engaging in with the international community to have a stable central government?
So the current government in Iraq started its mandate just before Daesh started to take over some of the territories in the north in the spring of 2014. It's been, if not stable, remarkably resilient given the situation it is facing, a financial crisis, a major security crisis, as we know, with an insurgency, difficult situation with respect to sectarian and sectarian tensions. So the current government's mandate is normally until 2018. So there will be, elections somewhere in that time frame. So in terms of preparing for a more stable government, I think certainly we're considering governance programming. I explained a little bit what was already happening in terms of support to decentralization. There's also you made the comparison with Lebanon. I think it's important to say that we have something a bit similar in Iraq, where the president traditionally is Kurdish, the prime minister is traditionally Shia, and the Speaker of the House is traditionally Sunni. But that does not necessarily foster stability.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say, is that can we move away from those distinctions?
I mean, the answer is not necessarily with us. I mean, there will have to be some political reconciliation, within the community, so that all politicians, especially at the highest levels, represent the whole country and not necessarily just their communities. I would not say that at the moment the people at the top of the countries are only representing their constituencies, but certainly they're vulnerable to pressure from these communities. So what can Canada do? Support, with our programming. But at the end of the day, the solution is political, and it will have to be Iraqi-led.
And for the meantime, right now, is Canada helping to develop any kind of safe zones for ethnic minorities?
Not at the moment. We are aware of the statements that were made by Chancellor Merkel to that effect. The idea of safe zones is one that can take different meanings. I think the way it's understood in the context of Iraq is territory that would be governed and where security would be controlled by a specific group. I mean, it certainly raises several questions, including do these safe zones become more vulnerable to attacks from people who would want to specifically target those communities? But we've reached out through our embassy in Berlin to Germany to hear more about their ideas, or find out if they have any specific plans on this, and so far we haven't heard anything.
Well, we're right on time. So that brings us to the end of our time for this afternoon. But once again, I want to thank Ms. Lamoureux and Ms. Natal for coming in and really getting the ball rolling on what's going to be an important and insightful study over the next number of weeks. So thank you to you both. Meeting adjourned.